This is the town of Leamington Spa, set on the winding river of Lamb. So what turned this once agricultural town into what it is today, with its busy streets and Victorian and Georgian architecture? The simple answer: water.
So here on Church Street are the two last remaining cottages of Len. From here is when it started to expand into the great town we know.
There are several springs located near the River of Lamb, primarily to the south. There are a total of 7 notable locations that were exploited for their water resources. The exploitation of the spa water springs led to the transformation of the small agricultural village called Leamington Priors into a fashionable resort, which in 1838 was permitted by Queen Victoria to call itself Royal Leamington Spa.
We decided to go and find some people to help us in learning more about the history of Leamington. So we looked online and found that Leamington History Society and emailed them if we could have an interview with them. They emailed back and said sure, and so we did, and this is what they told us about the history of Lem.
Originally Leamington was called Leamington, L-A-M-I-N-T-O-N-E, in the 1500s, and eventually it became Leamington Priors. But from Leamington days onwards there was known to be a well which stood in front of the parish church in Leamington, which eventually had a well house built round it, and that was owned by Lord Aylesford of Packington Hall, who was one of the big landowners of Leamington, but he wouldn't let it be used for commercial reasons. And there was 2 prominent Leamington people. One was called Benjamin Satchwell, who's got the pub named after him at the top of the town, and a chap called Abbots. And they went searching on land not owned by the rich landowners to see if they could find an alternate spring. And if you go into Bar Street now, there's a big shop there called Majestic Wines, and that's built on the site of Abbott's Bars, and that was a commercial well, and he could actually bring people from all over the country to come here and take the waters, and Lord Aylesford and the others can't have it, and that's when Leamington started to grow like mad. Because it was so, the first bath reputedly was 2 tin baths behind 2 curtains, but eventually they built a well house on the site which lasted until about the 1860s. But because it was so busy with people coming from all over Britain to there, he built a hotel adjoining it called the New Inn, which is now eventually was knocked down, and they built where the Spa supermarket in Bar Street is now, and that was probably the most important well in Leamington. They also found 5 more wells, 4 on that side of the river, and they eventually found the only one that's still working now, which is just over there, and it's piped under the road to that stone plinth on the other side by the bridge, and that's the only source of spa water now. All the others got shut down. The one in front of the church was demolished because it got contaminated, so they shut that down. And then Leamington was growing then all the time. It grew quite rapidly because we had stagecoaches bringing people here to take the water. But then something happened in the 1840s that changed everything. The railways came. The invention of the railway brought the first railway to Leamington in North Leamington at Milverton in 1844. And by 1850 there was direct lines from Leamington to London, Birmingham and all over. And the people who used to come and take the waters inland started to go to the seaside. And so that affected Leamington a little bit, but Leamington continued to grow. And Leamington originated on the other side of the river. And there's a little blue plaque on a building on the other side of the river telling you where Ben Satchwell lived. He was the first postmaster. But him and Abbots and a chap who had an art studio called Bissett advertised Leamington all over Britain. And then all the rich people came to Leamington to take the waters. And they lived in places like Bar Street and Clement Street, or stayed there, which they wouldn't do these days. But once they discovered the well over there, which was this side of the river, in 1814 they built the pump rooms over the road, and they had their own private grounds, which is the pump room gardens now, and they were private until about 1861, something like that, and that was why it ended. But after they found the well this side, all the development went north, and that's why all the architecture is quite impressive. When you go north, you've got wide roads, big houses, and this is why we had quite a reputation. And the roads were always wide, and there's loads of trees, and it was leafy Leamington. And that led to the development of Leamington. It grew and grew and grew. By the start of 1939, the Second World War, the population was 29,000. In the early days it was 380, and by about 1831 it had gone up to something like 14,000. And it was all because of the waters and the prosperity. And all the wonderful properties you still see now that are preserved are all because of all that growth. And Leamington is still growing. Lots of people come here, they like to live here, and everything about Leamington that's really boosting it now is Jaguar Land Rover, really. All the jobs they brought out to Gaydon and all around the area. And we've got the computer games industry are quite big in Leamington, and so there's a lot of creative industry here. And when I was growing up in the 60s, a long time ago, most of the work around here was working at a firm called Lockheed, or AP, who produced parts for cars, clutches, brakes and things. But they've all gradually gone, and all you see now is very little real industry in Leamington. But you've got all the effects of Jaguar Land Rover bringing all these high-class design. Like, everything's now new technology driven. And that's how Leamington's grown, really, and it's changing all the time. But we've still got these wonderful parks. This park you've got here, this was actually started to be laid down in 1834, and it was called Newbold Gardens. And it was owned by a family called the Willses, who owned most of this end of Leamington. And eventually the Willses decided to hand it over to a board of trustees in Leamington, and they were going to run the Jeffson Gardens. Well, it was Newbold Gardens, and there was a famous doctor in Leamington called Dr. Jeffson, who had nothing to do with the gardens, but they built a temple there and put a marble statue up, because Dr. Jeffson was a doctor who believed in good food, exercise and drinking lots of spa water. And if you didn't obey him, he sacked you as a patient. But he treated the poor for nothing. And he charged the rich as much as he could get, and that thing. And that was why this was called Jeffson Gardens, which upset the Wills family. And eventually they built an obelisk in about 1875 in the middle of the park, which commemorates the Wills family. And they lived in a big house at the far end of Holly Walk, which is straight up there. And everywhere. So it was all rich landowners everywhere. But we thrived and prospered. The only thing that put a blight on it was in 1840 when the Leamington Spa Bank crashed, and all the builders and architects went into some sort of panic. But it all came back. It died down a bit towards the end of the 1800s. The parade became, I say the parade, the real name of the shopping road is Parade. That became all shopping, and we became known for the shopping. And if you had been alive between 1951 and 1961, which neither of you will have been done, these gardens for 2 months of the year were lit up at night. It was called the Lights of Leamington, a big festival. Thousands of people came to this town for that. But in the end it died out because there was lots of drunken rowdyism and things like that. And this is all the sorts of things that have led to make Leamington what it is today. And it's still changing now. And towns, if they don't change, die. So it's quite thriving, it's a nice place to live, and that's where we are.
This is Abbott's Bath, but it was later taken over by James Court, and Bath was renamed called Bath. The third spring was here. This is what's left of the Wise Baths. It was built over a spa spring that was found in 1790, on the property of Matthew Wise. It was then later enlarged, and then became known as the Curtis Bath, after the manager, Mrs. Curtis. In 1847 it was enclosed, and 3 years later it was mostly demolished to make way for the new rail line. The Robbins Bath was built on a spring discovered in 1804, and the baths themselves were built 2 years later in 1806, and subsequently rebuilt as a Victorian terrace. It had 6 marble baths, a dressing room, a large cold bath, a children's bath and reception rooms. It was closed due to competition of the Royal Pump Rooms. Reed's Bath, later known as Lee's Bath, was founded in 1806, and in 1861 it was remade as a Turkish bath. Now, just to give you an idea how much this specific water type and the supply of it and the exploitation had an impact on the growth of the town, 4 years before the pump room was opened, the population was only around 543. However, 20 years later, it shot up to 2,183. This is the Royal Pump Rooms. This was designed and built in 1814 for around £30,000. That's just over 2.3 million in today's money. This is the primary bathhouse in Leamington, and was claimed to treat a variety of ailments such as stiffness of the tendons, rigidity of the joints, the effects of gout and rheumatism, and various paralytic conditions. They allowed not only for people to bathe in the mineral water but also drink it. One of the attractions that was the fact that the water had a mild laxative, which was seen as a healthy indulgence for the body at the time. Over the years, the building went through several owners, each trying to keep the original core of the business intact. In the late 1990s, it was redeveloped to become a centre of cultural tourism and is now an art gallery, museum and library.
And that was a brief history of Leamington and the Seven Springs, and how they were an important factor in the town's growth and development and made Leamington the town it is today.
Even though the baths are only around for a relatively short amount of time, the effect they had on this town is still being felt to this day.